Thorns without flowers, if not for this love of mine, by that Boba Pearl. Regulus. You have a problem, mate. Body dropped onto the sofa right next to Regulus, eyeing him with a sort of infectious amusement, the one with the twinkle in his eye and the crooked grin that only Barty could muster. Regulus rolled his eyes good-naturedly, mouth quirking up into a small smile against his will. And pray tell, what is my problem? Regulus asked, putting air quotes around the word. Potter, there's a there's a problem right there. Slytherins and Gryffindors? Not a good match. Barty started, and Regulus rolled his eyes a bit less good-naturedly. Of course, it wasn't the most optimal relationship, but it certainly wasn't a problem. Regulus would hex anyone else who called James, his love, his soleil, a problem. But from Barty, it was just annoying. How does he even stand you? How do you even stand him? It's a little something called love, Barty. You should try it sometime. It was supposed to be a simple joke, but Barty spluttered at that statement, gesturing with his hands as he tried to explain his situation, having slept with half of the girls in their year and a quarter of the boys. Regulus had even seen him making out with some Gryffindor girl at the last party, the hypocrite. But Reg, that's different. That's like, I'm living my best life now. Everyone wants me. Barty stuttered out, eyes wild, as if incredulous that Regulus would even suggest otherwise. Of course. His best friend and his very emotionally constipated heart. Regulus sighed. Do you want them? It was a simple question, but Barty paused, the previous mirth all but wiped out of his face. Of course I do. He paused again, then whispered, his last word pitching up so it sounded almost like a question. Of course I do. Barty, Regulus started in a soft voice. Barty had buried his face in his hands. Regulus pried his hands away from his face. Barty, it's alright if you don't. It's okay if this isn't it for you. Regulus paused for a second, then continues. This is about Evan, isn't it? Barty grimaces and pulls his hands away from Regulus, now running them through his hair. What if it is, Reg? It wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter because I don't matter to him. Not in that way, at least. You have James. It's not the same here. He's my best friend, for Merlin's sake. I can't just ruin that. He was rambling now, words tumbling out of his mouth like he couldn't keep them in any longer. What if you don't? What? What if you don't ruin it? What if he does like you back? Reg, don't give me false hope. Barty presses his face into his hands, mumbling something behind them. What? I said you have it so easy, so freaking easy with Potter and your stupid freaking perfect love story. The bitterness in his voice made Regulus wince. He knew Barty didn't mean that, but it still hurt. After all, it wasn't like it had been easy for him, but that wasn't the point. You're not mad at me, Barty, he said cautiously. Maybe I'm mad at myself, Barty said with a defeated sigh. Something seemed to have switched in him with those words. Fuck knows, Reg. Anyway, I'm off. Potions exam tomorrow. Sleep and all. And with that, Barty got up and left for their room. Regulus stared at where he'd been sitting, then at the fire in the fireplace, watching the flames dancing around each other. He sighed, then went back to writing the rest of his astronomy essay. Pandora. Pandora was laying on the ground, feet propped up on the sofa, reading one of the letters she'd gotten from Lily. They'd both thought it was a fun way to communicate, and with the riddles that they both liked to write and solve, they were fun to read too. The door to the common room opened and closed, but she didn't look up. Hey, Ben, came Evan's voice from the doorway. She glanced at him, slightly startled, but then gave a hum of acknowledgement. He sat down on the sofa near her feet and nudged her knee with his hand. Hey, Ev. What are you reading? She looked up at him and grinned. Letters from Lily? Oh? He worked an eyebrow in interest. He'd heard her rant about how amazing and kind and beautiful Lily was so many times in their fourth year. He'd helped her ask Lily out, mostly to avoid having to listen to the pining, but he was truly happy to see them together now. They were so sweet to each other. What did she say? It's nothing, just a few riddles, she replied, but the smile on her face betrayed her happiness. Evan smiled back, a soft smile that she'd never seen him direct at really anyone except Barty, of course. Why are you here? Huh? I thought you were going to be at the library with Reggie, she explained, looking him in the eye. He looked away, focusing his gaze on the ground near his feet instead. Barty's there, he responded after a few moments, voice quiet. His gaze hardened and he glared at the ground, sticking his tongue down the throat of that one Hufflepuff bloke. Don't know his name. Tom? Ted? Something, whatever. Pandora let out a little laugh. Right in the middle of the library? Eva didn't return her smile. Yeah, dunno what his problem is. What's he trying to show off? Evan trailed off, mumbling a few quite harsh curse words into his hand. They sat in silence for a bit, Pandora biting her lip as she tried to think of something to say. She read over a couple lines of Lily's letter, but her gaze strayed back to Evan, who still had his face buried in his hands. I can't do this anymore, Pan, he said. I can't keep watching him from a distance, knowing I'll never have him. Pandora sat up and climbed onto the sofa, softly nudging Evan's shoulder with hers. He looked up at her, and his eyes seemed sad and tired. He doesn't care about me in that way, does he? Evan looked defeated. Pandora put an arm around his shoulders, and Evan hugged back. A bit awkward because of their positioning side by side on the sofa, but Pandora really hoped it helped. She felt bad for Evan, and she also understood that Barty did love him back. He was just too thick to admit it. She just hoped both of them would figure it out soon. How do you know there isn't a chance that he does like you back? Evan scoffed. Pan, it's obvious. He keeps snugging other people, and with how much of a flirt he is, you'd think he'd have confessed already if he did like me. He does flirt with you. Quite a lot, actually. You know how he is, Dora. Body flirts with everyone, Evan says. What if this is different? She asked. And Evan gave her a little sad half smile, but it faded way quickly. What if it's not? Evan slid onto the ground from the couch to sit level with Pandora. They sat in silence for a bit, sides pressed together, reminiscent of evenings spent with each other when they were little and their parents were out. And they always were, as they always were. Pandora went back to reading her letters and rested her head on Evan's shoulder. Evan rested his cheek on top of her head and went back to thinking, just contemplating. About Body. Always about Body. Dorcas. It wasn't very often that Body came to talk to Dorcas. They were amazing friends, but they were also almost always in two different places. Dorcas could be found in the Gryffindor common room or in the library most of the time, doing schoolwork or with her girlfriend. And the only reason Body would step foot in either of those places was to be with Evan, or more rarely, one of his current trysts. When Dorcas found him in the Slytherin common room after she'd snuck back from a date turned makeout session with Marlene, she was a bit confused. Body wasn't quite the type to stay late in the common room, especially without Evan or Regulus. Right now, he seemed to be brooding. There was no better word for it, sitting with his head thrown back on the sofa, staring holes into the ceiling. She wasn't as great at feelings as Pandora, but she knew when someone was feeling down, and Barty, if the dark circles under his eyes said anything, he definitely was. Barty? He turned to look at her, and the dark circles seemed much more pronounced, she noticed, near his pale skin and light eyes. She sat down next to him, and he seemed a bit surprised, like he thought she would have just left him alone. Well, that wasn't ideal. You okay? She knew Barty didn't do well with such vague questions, but she wanted to know if he wanted to talk about it or not. It's not fair, he whispered. What isn't fair? He won't notice me. I just want him to see me. Why won't he? I don't know he knows I like him. How wouldn't he? Wait a moment. Dorcas interrupts, and Barty looks over at her, as if noticing she's there for the first time. His brows furrow, waiting for her to respond. But do you know he knows? Barty rolls his eyes incredulously. There's no way he doesn't. I flirt with him like every day. Dorcas sighed. Of course he wouldn't figure out the problem there. For how smart Barty was, he was really fucking oblivious sometimes. Barty, you flirt with everyone. Merlin, you even flirt with Regulus every day. But that's different, he spits his ass. I don't like him like that. And does Evan know that you like him like that? Have you been any different to him than with everyone else? Of course I have. He's Evan. Of course I've not flirted with him like all the others. He's not like them. He's different. Barty slowed down his talking and got a gleam in his eyes. The one he got whenever he talked about Evan. He's special. I know, Barty. I know that. But does he? Barty opened his mouth like he was about to say something, but then he closed it again, furrowing his eyebrows. I guess not. No. So? I need to tell him, he said, eyes taking on that spark like whenever he had a goal that he would see through to the end. Dorcas smiled. This was going to be interesting, but Dorcas knew it would turn out well. Party. Going to another party on a weeknight, too, was most likely an unwise decision. Luckily, Barty was known for those. No matter how much he wanted to just shout out his feelings for Evan from the rooftop, he couldn't. No matter how much he wanted to just shout out his feelings for Evan from the rooftops, he couldn't. Whenever he looked at Evan's beautiful blue eyes, when he thought about how amazing he felt just being around him, he couldn't. He couldn't throw away the only perfect thing he had. And then he talked to Dorcas, and he knew he wasn't going to ruin it. What Reg had said to him that day had finally made sense. Of course, if Evan didn't know Barty liked him, he wasn't going to say it back. Barty was going to tell him, but not yet. He needed a bit of time. A party with dancing and music and heaps of butterbeer was exactly the distraction he wanted. Evan had stayed back this time, which struck Barty as slightly odd, considering how Evan did like going to parties sometimes, if only for the alcohol and unsupervised fun. Barty would have liked him to be there tonight, but he also wouldn't. His already tipsy mind couldn't make up his mind about if seeing those pretty blue eyes would help his predicament or worsen it. His rational, sober side would have probably said the latter, but the alcohol had lowered his inhibitions, so he didn't really know anymore. He stumbled towards the door of the common room, still undecided, when a familiar person blocked his view. James Potter. Hey, Barty, he said, in his overly optimistic and very much annoying voice. Barty tried to push past him to get to the door, but James spoke again, more unsure. Where's Evan? What? Barty was a bit confused as to why James was confused. Evan had his own things to do, properly, and why would Barty know anyway? It's not like they were always together. Well, most of the time they were, but not all of the time. You know, your boyfriend? My what? Barty had had way too much alcohol to comprehend that. Potter, I've had no problem with you this far, but I'd really like you to stop being stupid and let me pass through. You're not together? James looked completely baffled now, and Barty shook his head, unamused. Granted to James Potter to work his emotional magic and come up with the one thing he wanted most. Well, that just won't do, James muttered under his breath, and Barty's brows furrowed. What? He repeated for the third time. He was beginning to feel quite stupid. What do you mean? Well, you've had to notice the way he looks at you. It's so sweet. Never thought that would be a word I'd use for Evan Rosier, but Evan's plenty sweet. He cut James off, glaring at him. James, to Barty's chagrin, smiled. And that's the other thing. He's literally only sweet to you, and you to him. Oh, Merlin, you guys would be so cute together. And scary. Cute and scary. Barty was sure his face was turning bright red. Shut up, he muttered. James' smile turned wider. Merlin, you do like him, don't you? That's awesome. If you want your eyes still in your sockets in the next couple of seconds, Potter, Barty got out, I encourage you to shut up. James grinned. Like Reggie would let you do that. Two played that game. Barty pulled on a surprised expression. Well, if it isn't Sirius Black. James turned around, eyes wide. Where? By the time he saw that there was nobody behind him, Barty had made his way through the crowd to the 70-year who was passing out via whiskey and gin. You can't ignore your feelings forever, James called out behind Barty. Watch me, Barty yelled back, half a joke, half a cop-out. Just this one night, then I'll tell him. Evan. There had been a party that night, one which Evan didn't go to, considering it was a Hufflepuff house party. They weren't too hard to get invites to, but Evan hadn't had much of an interest in going anyway. The same couldn't be said for Barty. As soon as he got an invite from the person he'd just flirted with, most likely, he'd been picking out his outfit. There wasn't anything special about this particular party. Barty just really enjoyed parties in general. Not so much the morning after. He'd come back to the dorm drunk, and Evan had helped him into bed. Before he knew it, Barty had grabbed hold of his hand and pulled him half on top of him. Barty, Evan startled, eyes wide at the proximity. Mate, what are you doing? Barty paused for a moment, like making up his mind on something. Then he tilted his head up to meet Evan's eyes, grey burning into hazel. Even though Barty was drunk and out of it right now, his gaze was intense. Stay? Barty asked, his alcohol-tinged breath hot on Evan's face. Evan's cheeks heated. Why? Because. Ev, you're very pretty. Do you know that? Barty said, his words slurring together and his mouth in a goofy grin, the intense moment broken. Doesn't answer my question, Evan responded, although smiling too now. Just 'cause. Barty tugged on Evan's hand, as if trying to keep him from running away. Alright then, Bat, Evan said, smiling softly. Barty smiled back, and Evan slid under the cover next to him. Barty immediately curled into him, arms around him and uncomfortably close, except for the fact that it was Barty. They got comfortable, like they used to do every night in their second and third year. It was a bit more awkward now, what with Barty's lanky frame and both of them being older, but it felt the same. It felt amazing. Barty's breath slowed after a few minutes, his eyes slipping shut. Evan didn't stay awake much longer. When they woke up, they were curled into each other, as tightly as they'd been last night. Evan's face smushed into Barty's shoulder. Barty was tracing little shapes on his arm, and for a moment it seemed like everything was perfect. Then Evan remembered that Barty had probably had his tongue down some other person's throat last night. He pressed his face into the crook of Barty's neck and tightened his arms around him. Whatever, at least he could enjoy this morning. Evan rested his chin on Barty's chest and squinted to look at him. He looked a bit tired, probably from the hangover, but smiled at Evan. Hey, Rosie. Evan smiled back at him at the old nickname. It was just a silly little thing Barty had come up with their second year, but it had stuck. Hey, B. Barty's smile grew at the familiar nickname. Then, suddenly, Barty looked away, gaze falling on the wall beside them. Evan had a bad feeling, but he pushed it down. Barty? He asked quietly. You okay? I don't know how to tell you this, but Barty took a deep, slightly shaky breath. Evan's brows furrowed in concern. I've wanted to tell you this for ages, really. I think, well, I know I've been with a lot of different people, but they're not, what I'm trying to say is, he cut himself off, looking at Evan. They're not you. They're not you, and I want you. And it's not just that. I really like you, Evan Rosier. Evan's eyes had widened throughout the speech as his brain struggled to comprehend what Barty was saying. He wanted Evan? He really liked Evan? And he meant it. He said Evan's full name, and he never did that unless he was being serious. And I don't know if you like me, but Merlin Barty, Evan said, his mouth speaking before his thoughts. I like you too. Just shut up and kiss me. Barty's eyes widened and he nodded enthusiastically before leaning in. He met Evan in a soft kiss, just a brush of their lips, and a breath of the same air. But it was perfect. It was like the whole world fell away. Then it was just Evan and Barty, as if it was always meant to be that way. That was cute. Funny as well, but that was cute.